The West did not begin shrinking when the railroad arrived. It began shrinking when a man touched a metal key. Before October 1861, urgent news crossing the continent still moved at the speed of horses, coaches, ships, and human endurance. A message from California could spend days in a saddlebag and weeks in transit. Then the first transcontinental telegraph line connected the Eastern network with the Pacific. On October 24th, a message could travel coast to coast in minutes. 2 days later, the Pony Express formally ended. The horse remained. The stagecoach remained. Distance remained. But information had escaped them that changed nearly every system that claimed to control the American West. Railroads, banks, newspapers, mining companies, merchants, the army, law officers, weather observers, cattle buyers, and land speculators. The wire did not simply carry news through the frontier. It decided who received the news first, whose orders arrived in time, and which town understood that the world had changed before its neighbors did. The telegraph looked unimpressive. A line of poles crossed country that seemed too large to organize. Glass insulators separated wire from wood. Inside a station, the machinery could fit on a desk, a key for sending electrical pulses, a sounder for receiving them, batteries or line connections, paper, pencils, and a clock. The power came from coordination. Every station became a narrow doorway into a network much larger than the settlement around it. The person at that doorway was the operator. A skilled operator did not hear meaningless clicking. He heard letters. Short and long electrical signals became names, prices, train orders, warnings, deaths, business instructions, election results, military requests, and private sentences people were willing to pay to send. The operator wrote them down, repeated them when necessary, routed them onward, and tried not to make a mistake. That last part mattered more than the public usually understood. A misspelled name could delay a legal order. A wrong number could change the price of cattle or shares. A train order copied incorrectly could place 2 locomotives on the same track. Telegraph companies developed rules, abbreviations, repeated confirmations, and disciplined operating habits because speed without accuracy was another kind of danger. Yet speed was what customers purchased. Messages priced by word count encouraged compressed, occasionally brutal language. Courtesy cost money. A family message could arrive with the shape of an order. Come at once. Father worse. A merchant might receive hold cattle, price falling. A sheriff could learn that a suspect had boarded a westbound train before it reached the next division point. The message arrived fast. The human consequence still had to travel through a door. Many Western telegraph offices stood inside railroad depots. The same employee might sell tickets, process freight, answer questions, receive telegrams, and copy train orders from a dispatcher hundreds of miles away. From a projecting bay window, the operator watched the track in both directions. A semaphore or signal could tell an approaching crew that written orders were waiting. The depot looked like a public building. In operational terms, it was part of the railroad's nervous system. Without telegraphy, early railroads depended heavily on fixed schedules, timetables, and the assumption that trains would be where the printed plan said they should be. But trains broke down. Snow blocked cuts. Livestock wandered onto track. Bridges burned. Crews lost time. A delayed train created danger because another train continued moving according to information that was now wrong. The telegraph allowed dispatchers to change the plan. An operator could receive instructions telling one train to wait at a siding, another to proceed, and a third to expect opposing traffic. The order was written, repeated back, checked, and delivered to the crew. A few lines of text controlled hundreds of tons of iron moving through darkness. The public saw the locomotive. The railroad trusted the message. This hidden authority explains why telegraph lines so often followed tracks, and why the Pacific Railway Act of 1862 supported construction of both a railroad and telegraph line. Congress wanted transportation, but it also wanted command. The federal government expected postal, military, and other use of the network. Rails moved troops and supplies. Wires moved the decisions that told them where to go. The West was therefore not conquered by one technology. It was coordinated by 2. the system remained exposed. Storms, ice, floods, fire, falling trees, work crews, and deliberate cutting could break a line. A lineman followed the route with tools, wire, and insulators until he found the fault. The promise of instant communication depended on someone repairing metal in a place where help might still be days away. The contradiction ran through the entire system. Telegraphy felt almost magical to the customer, but it was made of wood poles, metal wire, acid batteries, human hearing, handwriting, and maintenance. Every message passed through material that could fail and people who could misunderstand it. Still, when it worked, the effect was startling. Sacramento could learn what Washington had decided before a horse left the first station. Newspapers gained faster national news. Mining investors reacted before samples arrived. Railroad managers governed distant divisions, and the Army requested reinforcement without first sending a rider. The telegraph did not remove uncertainty. It made uncertainty arrive sooner. That distinction matters, because faster information could prevent disaster, but it could also spread panic, rumor, bad orders, and financial pressure before anyone had time to inspect the facts. A report sent from a mining camp might enrich someone far away before the claim was proven. A newspaper could publish dramatic news transmitted in fragments. A military commander could act on a message stripped of context. The wire was fast enough to look authoritative. That made the operator more than a technician. He or she stood between raw signals and action. Operators knew which businesses were failing, which trains were late, who had died, which law officer was coming, and what price a distant market had placed on local work. They were expected to keep confidence while living in communities small enough to notice every closed office door. The operator heard the West before the West understood what it had heard. And on one winter morning in Nebraska Territory, that difference helped turn an isolated telegraph station into a military target. The station at Mud Springs existed because the overland route needed water, shelter, and communication across western Nebraska. By February 1865, the telegraph there had become something more valuable than the buildings around it. The region was already living with the consequences of the Sand Creek Massacre. On November 29, 1864, troops under Colonel John Chivington attacked a Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment in Colorado Territory and killed roughly 230 people, many of them women, children, and older people. In the months that followed, Cheyenne, Lakota, and Arapaho groups struck routes, ranches, stations, and other symbols of the expanding American presence across the plains. Mud Springs was one of those symbols. When the station came under attack in early February, the telegraph allowed its defenders to request help. Messages moved faster than the relief force ever could. Soldiers at Fort Laramie and other posts learned that the station was in danger, while the men inside were still holding it. The wire did not win the fight by itself. Reinforcements still had to mount, travel, and arrive. Weather, distance, and resistance still governed the result. But the telegraph altered the possibility of survival. An isolated station was no longer completely isolated as long as the circuit remained open. That condition, so long as the circuit remained open, made the wire part of the battlefield. Military planners valued telegraphy because it compressed command time. Native resistance groups understood that stations, stage routes, railroads, and wires were connected pieces of the same occupation. Cutting communication could delay military response and expose how dependent the new system had become on a thin strand of metal. The telegraph did not float above Western conflict as neutral progress. It served governments, companies, and settlement. The line itself announced who expected to control the future. Tracks and poles crossed land already inhabited, hunted, traded across, or claimed by native nations. They carried property instructions, troop movements, and commercial demands. To an Eastern investor, a completed line represented connection. To people losing land and autonomy, it represented distant power arriving faster. The network changed the balance between center and frontier. Corporate headquarters supervised employees from another state. Federal authority reached territories before stable courts, roads, or civilian institutions formed. The wire made distance less protective. It also changed the meaning of news. Before telegraphy, an event and the outside reaction to it were separated by travel time. A mining camp might live with a strike, fire, killing, or discovery for days before newspapers elsewhere knew. After a wire reached the area, an event could become a market story almost immediately. Consider a gold or silver discovery. The physical ore remained in the ground. Assayers still had to test it. Companies still needed machinery, labor, timber, water, transport, and capital. Yet a telegraphed report could move the price of a mining stock before the mine had produced enough metal to justify the excitement. Men in San Francisco, New York, or another financial center could buy or sell based on word sent from a remote office. The mine had two outputs, ore and information. Information traveled first. An owner could promote a strike, a rival could spread doubt, and an operator might recognize unusual traffic before a public announcement. Confidentiality was essential, but advanced knowledge could matter in a market. Companies imposed call signs, forms, routing rules, and repeated confirmations. Each relay still introduced another person and another chance for error. Good operators became known by their touch. The timing of a key was personal enough that experienced telegraphers could sometimes recognize who was sending before the operator identified the station. Speed mattered, but clean sending mattered more. A hurried, uneven operator could exhaust everyone down the line. Skilled telegraphers developed a professional culture that crossed geography. Two people who had never met could know one another through rhythm. That intimacy existed beside anonymity. The customer might never know how many operators handled a telegram. The operators knew pieces of lives they would never enter. They sent business offers, arrest notices, demands for doctors, election figures, and messages asking families to prepare for a body arriving by rail. A death that once approached slowly in a letter now reached the door, in an envelope. If you had worked that key, which message would have been hardest to deliver? A warning you were not sure had arrived in time, or news you knew would change a family before the door opened? Leave your answer in the comments. There is no clean choice, and telegraph operators had to return to the desk after making it. The network kept clicking. By the 1870s, it was also learning to observe the sky. The ability to collect weather conditions from distant places at nearly the same moment created something the West had never possessed: a large-scale picture of weather while it was still happening. Earlier observers could record local temperature, pressure, wind, and rain. Telegraphy allowed those observations to be gathered quickly enough to compare them. In 1870, the Army Signal Service began a national weather operation officially called the Division of Telegrams and Reports for the benefit of commerce. On November 1st, synchronized observations from 24 stations were transmitted to Washington. The title sounded bureaucratic because the project was bureaucratic. Instruments, fixed observation times, trained personnel, coded reports, telegraph lines, central analysis, and public warnings. For a rancher, freighter, railroad, shipper, or town, the idea that weather elsewhere could warn of weather coming was revolutionary. Forecasting remained limited, but telegraphy transformed weather from local memory into a national stream of observations. By 1890, the network had grown to roughly 178 stations. Information about atmosphere now traveled through the same wires as train orders and market prices. One instrument could deliver railroad orders, a merchant's telegram, news copy, and weather observations to a town without paved streets or electric lighting. The frontier was not technologically empty. It was uneven. An operator might sit beside one of the fastest communication systems on Earth and still haul water, heat the office with a stove, use an outhouse, and wait days for a replacement part. The message could cross a state before the operator could cross the muddy street. That unevenness made the telegraph feel both modern and fragile. It could direct a train through the night, but a fallen pole could silence it. It could announce a storm but not stop the roof from lifting. It could request a doctor but not place the doctor beside the injured man. Its power was not that it solved problems. It reorganized the order in which people learned they had them. Railroad dispatching revealed the telegraph at its most controlled and most dangerous. Imagine a single-track railroad crossing open country. Trains move in both directions, but they cannot pass wherever they please. Sidings are placed miles apart. Freight trains run slowly on grades. Passenger trains demand priority. A locomotive may be delayed taking water, repairing equipment, loading livestock, or waiting for track to clear. The timetable creates an expected world. The dispatcher manages the real one. From a central office, the dispatcher tracked trains using reports from operators along the line. When conditions changed, he issued new orders. One train might be instructed to meet another at a named siding. A freight could be held for an express. An extra train not listed in the timetable required protection. Every order had to identify trains and locations precisely enough that crews could act without seeing the larger picture. The station operator copied the order by hand. The principle was strict: receive, write, repeat, verify, and deliver. The operator could not improve unclear language by guessing. Copies went to conductor and engineer, while signals told the train that orders were waiting. The entire procedure existed because the alternative was collision. A train crew approaching a lonely depot at night might see a lamp or semaphore and know that the plan had changed. The locomotive stopped. Paper crossed from operator to crew. Men read the order beneath lantern light. A few sentences replaced the schedule they had trusted for miles. Then the train continued into darkness. The operator remained behind, responsible without controlling the locomotive. If a crew misunderstood or an order reached the wrong train, danger could develop beyond physical reach. Telegraphy created remote control before the phrase existed. It also created remote helplessness. This allowed more traffic on limited track. Cattle, ore, lumber, mail, and people moved through a timetable constantly adjusted by invisible conversation. The wire quietly made Western growth cheaper. It also helped companies centralize. A station agent was no longer simply the railroad's representative in one town. He was the local hand of a distant organization. Headquarters could demand reports, approve decisions, set rates, reroute cars, and monitor performance. The telegraph reduced the freedom of local managers while increasing the power of the company above them. Merchants experienced the same change. Before fast communication, a storekeeper ordered stock based on local judgment and long delays. With telegraph service, prices and orders could move in minutes, and goods arrived by rail in days. A surviving account of Tucson after the railroad's arrival described orders to the West Coast, Kansas City, St. Louis, or New York being transmitted in minutes. Prices fell as goods became easier to obtain. That helped customers. It threatened merchant princes who had profited from scarcity, distance, and slow information. The telegraph did not kick down a door. It changed who knew the wholesale price, allowed corporations to compare markets, and made old advantages temporary. Cattle buyers used telegraphic market information to judge demand and price. Ranchers closer to a wire could react faster than isolated competitors. Newspapers printed distant prices. A shipment of livestock represented months or years of work, but its value could be influenced by figures clicking through a station after the herd had already begun moving. The cowboy saw cattle. The market saw a telegram. Descriptions of suspects and stolen property could move ahead of a train. A fugitive might outrun one sheriff while his description reached the next town first. A wrong name could spread suspicion just as quickly. Speed magnified both competence and error. Telegraphic news let Western editors publish distant events, while current but condensed reports often lacked detail. Editors rearranged and interpreted fragments. Drama could appear before correction. The telegraph accelerated the newspaper. The newspaper accelerated the legend. Stories about outlaws, battles, strikes, disasters, mining discoveries, and political conflict traveled far beyond the communities where events occurred. A local gunfight could become a national Western episode because the wire freed it from local memory. The same network that managed freight also manufactured reputation. Towns learned to live with versions of themselves created elsewhere. Dodge City, Deadwood, Tombstone, Virginia City, and other Western places became names before many readers could locate them accurately on a map. Telegraphic dispatches supplied incidents. Newspapers and dime novels supplied shape. The public received a frontier that felt immediate but was often simplified. That pattern resembles modern communication more than people expect. A brief message travels quickly, context follows slowly. Repetition creates confidence. The fastest version becomes the remembered one. The 19th century operator did not choose the entire system, but sat at its narrowest point. Women also worked as operators. Telegraphy offered technical work and unusual professional mobility, often at lower wages than men received. The instrument did not care who touched the key. Employers and communities did. She might know train movements and private news before leading men in town while being paid less and judged more closely. Hours followed train schedules, not comfort. The operator listened while handling tickets, baggage, freight, and customers. Attention was the actual machinery. The operator's body completed the circuit: ear, hand, memory, pencil, voice. Fatigue entered the network through that body. So did fear, confidence, experience, and habit. By the early 1880s, telegraphy was about to impose one more invisible system on the West. It would tell thousands of towns that their clocks were wrong. Before standard railway time, American towns generally kept local solar time. Noon occurred when the sun reached its highest point in that place. The result was logical locally and chaotic nationally. Railroad schedules had to navigate dozens of regional and local times. According to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, North American railroads were dealing with 49 different railroad times. On November 18, 1883, the railroads changed the clock. At noon, telegraph lines transmitted time signals used to implement 5 standard railway time zones across North America. The system was not initially imposed by a federal law. Railroad companies adopted it because their network had become too large and interdependent for every town to define noon independently. The telegraph made synchronization possible. A station clock was no longer only a local object. It belonged to a continental operating system. Trains, crews, tickets, meetings, freight, and connections required shared time. Communities soon adopted railroad time for ordinary life because the depot had become one of the places that mattered most. No gunfighter stood in the street, and no election decided the sun. Companies adopted new hours, and towns adjusted because refusing would make them late. The West had been measured by rivers, trails, mountains, and distance. Now it was divided into zones. The telegraph taught institutions to behave as if distant places occupied one coordinated present. A train, storm, cattle price, or military request became part of one operating picture. The network created simultaneity. It also created dependence. Once railroads used telegraphic train orders, silence became dangerous. Once merchants relied on current prices, delayed information created risk. Once newspapers promised fresh dispatches, old news lost value. Once towns set clocks by transmitted signals, the wire entered daily routine. A tool began as an advantage and became an expectation. The system could no longer return easily to life before it. The telegraph operator witnessed that transition from a desk. There are more cinematic jobs in the Old West. The stage driver holds reins over a dangerous grade. The cowboy turns a running herd. The marshal enters a saloon. The miner lights a fuse. The operator sits still. Yet a hand resting over a key might halt a freight train, summon soldiers, report a robbery, move a market, announce a death, or tell a town to reset every clock it owned. The work concentrated consequence into small movements: press, release, listen, write. The instrument itself produced little drama for a camera, which is one reason the telegraph remains background decoration in so many Western films. It clicks in the depot while the heroes speak. A messenger tears off a strip of paper. The plot continues. Historically, the plot often continued because the message arrived. A railway agent learned an extra train was coming. A banker confirmed instructions. A family learned someone would not return. Each message altered behavior before its physical source arrived. A Pony Express rider carried information through every mile. The telegraph separated message from messenger, although linemen, operators, and stations still carried the danger. The famous rider became a national icon. The operator became infrastructure. Western Union's completion of the transcontinental line in October 1861 is often described as the event that ended the Pony Express, and it did. But ending one mail service was the smallest part of the change. The line helped create a West in which corporations, government departments, newspapers, and markets could act across distance with unprecedented speed. The frontier remained violent and uncertain. Now, its uncertainty could be administered from far away. That administration was not neutral. The telegraph strengthened the people and institutions able to build lines, purchase service, employ operators, and act on information. It helped railroads and federal forces extend authority. It supported commerce and settlement that transformed native lands. It offered communities warning and connection while drawing them more tightly into outside systems. The wire carried rescue requests and orders of dispossession with the same indifference. The current did not ask who was right. People decided what to send. That human choice is easy to miss when technology is described as inevitable. Lines had routes. Companies received privileges. Governments wrote contracts. Operators followed rules. Messages were prioritized, priced, copied, delayed, or refused. The network reflected power because people built it to serve particular needs. And still, individual operators sometimes used it for the immediate need in front of them. A doctor, a warning, a missing child, a delayed husband, a fire, a train trapped by snow. Large systems become human at the point where someone chooses which words matter now. If you have ever visited an old Western depot and seen a telegraph key behind glass, tell us where it was. Perhaps the building stands in a town whose entire future once depended on the messages received in that room. If you believe we missed an important telegraph story from your state, put the name in the comments. Even criticism is useful when it gives us a better trail to follow. If you are watching on a television, use your phone to open the same video. Subscribing and typing a location is far easier there and takes only a few seconds. Then look again at the quiet little instrument on the larger screen. It helped run the West without ever leaving the desk. By the end of the 19th century, telephone service was growing and new communication systems would follow. Telegraphy did not vanish at once. Railroads continued using operators and train orders for decades. News, commerce, government, and private life had already been reorganized around the expectation that word should travel quickly. The poles eventually disappeared from many landscapes. Wires were rerouted, buried, abandoned, or replaced. Depots closed. Sounders fell silent. The habit remained. We still expect a warning to arrive before the danger. We expect distant prices to be current. We expect headquarters to know where everything is. We expect the same time to mean the same moment across enormous space. The Old West did not have those expectations at first. The telegraph taught them. Somewhere on a night shift, an operator sat beside a lamp while the town slept. The tracks outside looked empty. The wire above them seemed motionless. Then the sounder clicked. The operator reached for a pencil, and the West changed direction before anyone else in the room knew a message had begun.